Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. I know it's been a little bit since my last video. I needed to take a little time because that last one was pretty intense, and also I took my first vacation in like 14 months, which was fabulous, and so now I'm all rested, relaxed, back in action. Thank you for tuning in to this video. Just a quick kind of reminder, if you have not watched my introduction video or the ones after that, this is my channel dedicated to ex-Jehovah's Witness activism and sharing my story in sequence. So in my previous 4 videos, have talked about kind of my past life. Today, I am to the point that I am going to discuss my waking up process. This video is going to be a little bit of a challenge because, like anything else, the waking up process, for anyone who has done that or is in the process of that, is an emotional journey. And so I apologize ahead of time if this takes me a little bit more to get through, but just bear with me. For those who have never been Jehovah's Witnesses, waking up is the term that we use when talking about what it took for us to mentally break free from that indoctrination. So for myself, as I kind of touched on towards the end of my last video, I was disfellowshipped, but mentally I still was in the organization. So I was being shunned actively by the congregation. My family members kind of soft shunned me at that point. Again, since my parents were gone and it was just us siblings, the ones that were still witnesses would still, even though they were out of state, they would still like speak to me on occasion, not regularly, but it was kind of like to check in. And the reason for that is because I know they believed that since I had been disfellowshipped before and reinstated, they thought that I would get reinstated again, and so they believed that I believed that it was the truth and that I would be back. And so for them, they were upset when I was disfellowshipped, but I know that they very firmly believed that like it was just very temporary. So to me, in my mind, I also believed that it was temporary, and I also thought that I would one day return to the religion. I wanted to do it quick, relatively quick, but life kind of tackled me, and so I was living life. I had friends, and of course, as I touched on before, I had met someone who was not a witness at all, never had anything to do with it, and he and I began a relationship. So of course, to get reinstated, to become a witness again, I would have to either break up with him or marry him, and neither one of us wanted to do either of those things at that time. So, which I'm really grateful for, because of that. I mean, that's the pillar, I would say. That's kind of the foundation or the cornerstone of my eventual wake-up process. So my partner, he did not ever one time say anything like really negative about the witnesses. He would ask me once in a while about like certain beliefs, or like, why do they do this or why do they do that? But he never ever criticized. Now, come to find out, after I was awake, and And I told him, like, I think I was in a cult. He was like, yeah, we've all known that for a long time. So he really just showed patience, but he never actively said, like, this is really damaging and you need to get out, because he knew that that would just make me shut down, I think. So he just was very patient in me, like, in my process. So right before I was disfellowshipped, probably one of the chinks in my armor of believing that it was the truth and my waking up process from the fact that they are a high control group was there was an elder who was a very close friend. He actually kind of was like a father figure to me in a lot of ways, and we were really, really close. He was close with my husband and at the time, because this was when I was getting ready, to go through my divorce. He was close with both of us, he and his wife, but I felt a very close bond with him, and I confided in him through the years, like, different issues and stuff that I had in my marriage, and he was always very supportive and very kind. So when I went ahead and got divorced, and again, I was not disfellowshipped yet, but the proceedings were going on, and I was going to be disfellowshipped relatively soon. He called me, and I had left the congregation that he was in, like, months before, and I was in a new hall. So when he called me, I was really happy and excited, because I thought, like, this is like my spiritual dad, like, reaching out to me. And so he said, like, I heard that you are separated, and that you're, like, going ahead with a divorce. And I said, yeah, like, because he already knew a lot of things. And I knew that he knew my ex, and so he knew what a terrible, narcissistic, awful person that he was. And he just said to me, like, you can't do that. Like, you can't get a divorce. You have to stick with him. Like, you took a vow, this is a marriage. And I just remember being completely like, blindsided by that, because I understood that that was the elders as a whole and the organization's push or belief, but I thought he was going to basically be there to kind of, like, support me as a person, especially understanding what I'd gone through. So I remember sitting on the phone. I was actually in the car at the time, and I pulled over and I laid out every single thing that happened in my marriage, like a laundry list. I just, I went through, like, the times that he cheated on me, like, the whole long list of things that I talk about in my last video. And at the very end, because I said, after I listed all that, I said, I'm supposed to just, like, go back, like, I'm just supposed to stay with them. And at the very end of the conversation, he literally just said, I know he can be difficult, and I know these things are hard, but you had already forgiven him at some point in the marriage for his, basically his sexual indiscretions. And so you have no grounds to leave. And obviously you both are not putting Jehovah first, and you need to come back to him, and you both need to make sure that Jehovah is put first in your marriage, and this is not okay. And I remember that it felt like somebody just, like, pulled the rug out from underneath me, and I was just absolutely mortified, and I cried for days, because I thought this was, like, the only man, older, like, I kind of viewed him, like I said, like a dad or an uncle or something, and he zero support. And so I just, like, hung up the phone, and that was the first slight aha moment that I had. No matter how close you think you are to someone in the organization, especially someone in leadership, or former leadership or whatever, they will not put you and your needs first when push comes to shove. Like, they won't. It's their religion and their belief system before your own safety. Because I even said that. I was like, I left because I thought he was going to, like, really hurt me, or, like, my life was in danger. And it was just, no, like, well, too bad. And I just remember being, like, completely dumbfounded and hurt, and just, it was such a big, blow to me as a person, like my self-esteem. I already was dealing with guilt for leaving the situation, and then I had that just compounded, like, basically told, yes, you should feel guilty because you're doing the wrong thing. And it just was very, very tough. But that came at kind of an interesting time, because I was on the fence about, like, do I tell the elders that I'm doing some things that could get me disfellowshipped? And then I just was like, well, I guess yes, because I'm already doing something so wrong by leaving my abusive husband that I might as well just, like, tell them everything else I'm doing wrong. So it was a very interesting time. And to this day, I understand that we need, and I hope that, like, elders leave the organization and use their voice and speak out. I hope that they step down from their responsibilities when they wake up, or I hope they wake up to begin with, and that they step down and leave, because we need those voices from people who had their own book of instructions on how to deal with the people in the congregation. We need more of those voices. But at the same time, through the years, I've been, like, personally so harmed by the elder body. I remember when I was 16 and having an elder say to me that, coming up to me, who had been on the committee for my child abuse case, and asking me how my abuser was settling into his new place. And I had an elder when I was 14 tell me that, because I have older sisters, and he told me that, by the time I was all grown up, that I would be the most attractive one of my sisters. And the list goes on and on and on by how I personally been, like, terribly wronged by elders. And so I very much struggle with when I hear experiences of, like, an elder wanting to fade and being afraid of how they're going to be treated. I really struggle with that. So if anyone has advice besides saying, like, oh, men are raised with this pressure to become elders, and we're all in a cult. Like, I realize we're all part of a brainwashed scheme. I totally understand that. But I'm really working hard on letting go of some of the, like, pain that the elder body has caused me through my life, and hoping instead that of that hurt, that I can turn it into a focus to really, like, root for him to get out and get on this side of things. So, sorry, that's just a very little personal vent and a little bit of a peek inside of really the only thing, I shouldn't say the only thing, the major thing that I'm left, like, really struggling with, because I feel like the elders are kind of that first tier, right? They're the first tier of people who are covering up child abuse, who are listening to, just blindly taking direction, who are giving terrible advice to people in crisis. So that's kind of, I guess, my first tier of pain and maybe a little bit of resentment. So that realization was kind of my first little bit of an aha and wake up moment. Another came when I started really making friends with people in the LGBTQ community. And I realized how hateful that I was to that community, and how much disdain and disrespect that I had for that entire group of people, and I was so uneducated about it that even when I was out, mentally, I still felt like they were a lower class citizen. Even though I was nice to them and I liked some of them as people, I just had a completely warped view, like one does. But when I got to know some people in that community on a very personal level, it started me down a path of very deep self-reflection and understanding how terrible that it is the way that that community is viewed and treated within the Jehovah's Witness organization, just like any other evangelical conservative group, the judgment and the harsh things that are said and thought. So that was one of my other big, first of all, I had to take a lot of time to educate myself, and it took a lot of eating humble pie and changing my entire thought process and so on and so forth. I'm happy to say that the very first time I actually spoke out about being raised in a cult was at a Pride event a couple years ago. They were kind enough to allow me to give a little bit of a 15-minute little speech at the event on what it was like to be raised that way, and also the fact that you can change the way that you feel, and you can go from being so brainwashed and hateful to being an advocate and an ally. So that was a big part of my wake-up process as well. This is all interesting because most of my full wake-up process came after I learned some doctrinal things, but honestly, probably 90% of it was all based on the human interaction and the principles of the organization. So we have those couple of things that happen, and then in the meantime, I've talked about a few times my older brother, John. He and I were the last two in the family, and we were both disfellowshipped. He was disfellowshipped for a while longer than I was. All of our other siblings were witnesses. So John and I, of course, and we lived in the same area. Almost all of our other siblings lived out of state. And so we were fortunate enough to be in the same area. And so because we were disfellowshipped and we were brother and sister and we'd always been the closest in the family, we hung out all the time. We were, I guess what you would quintessentially say when you think of an older brother and a little sister, that's what we were, extremely close. But John was awake mentally way before me. And he would come to my house and we'd have really long conversations about the way that we were raised and stuff. And he was throwing around the word cult, that we were raised in a cult and stuff way before I was comfortable with that. And he knew it. And so he would kind of shut down that part of the conversation. But he would still pursue it without using the phrase cult and go more with high control group. So John was this really tall, he was 6'6", fit, did physical work for a living. So really strong, big guy. And he was kind of quiet. He was never had to be the center of attention or the life of the party. And he's the guy who would literally give you the shirt off his back. He was the most awesome. And so we were really, really close. And then in September, so I was disfellowshipped in 2000, end of 2011. And so 2012 on, we were together all the time. I mean, we had talked and everything before that and we're close, but then we got back to being extremely close. So then in 2014, September, I was at work and he worked in Ohio, which is a neighboring state to me. So he would sometimes work there. And so I was at work on a Friday night and my cell phone rang. And it was like 10 minutes before I was leaving leaving the office. And I saw it was the same area code where he worked. And I was like, oh, because he would come over on the weekends a lot. And I was like, oh, he's just calling from work, check to see if he can come over this weekend. So I answered it, and it wasn't him. It was a police officer. And he was like, is this Johanna Green? And I said, yeah. And he said, do you know a John Green? And I immediately got like really irritated because John had been arrested a couple of times once it was a DUI, and then the other time it was basically because he got into an altercation with a police officer. So he was a really great guy, but he just, he had some issues once in a while. So I thought, oh man, did he get arrested again? And like they're calling me from jail, and I'm gonna have to go over tonight and bail him out. And as I'm thinking this, I'm thinking like, how much money do I have in the bank? How late are they gonna be open? Will they have to spend the weekend? Do I have to go Monday morning? I'm trying to come up, and then I'm like, oh, he's gonna have to pay me back. Like, I'll pay for it, but he better pay me back. And then the police officer said to me, I'm really sorry to have to tell you this. And my mind went to when I was young, my dad had told me he was in Nevada at a truck stop having dinner because he drove semi for a living. And he was having dinner, and a police officer walked up to his table and said to him, are you Mr. Stan Green? And my dad said yes. And he said, I'm sorry to inform you that your daughter Jennifer's been killed in a motorcycle accident. And that's how my dad had found out. And because this was way before cell phones, this was back in '83. And so my dad had to drive cross country then. So when I heard that police officer say to me on the phone, I'm really sorry to have to tell you, I heard that story from my dad like in my brain simultaneously. And I like just started yelling no at him on the phone, like over and over. And I said, then don't tell me. And I worked in an office. So I'm sitting in my cubicle, like screaming this like a mad woman. And then I had the wherewithal to like get up and go to an office and like shut the door. And he just on the other side of the phone kept talking over me. He was like, I'm sorry. And then as soon as I was quiet, he said, I'm sorry, but you're, because I had told him, yeah, I know John, that's my brother. Like, I had been irritated at first. And then he said, I'm sorry to have to tell you that he's passed away. No, he said, I'm sorry to tell you that he's died. And I remember that because it was so like cold cut, and I don't mean that in a bad way. There was no denying what he was telling me. I'm glad to this day that the detective told me that way, because it was like no mistaking what he had said. And so I found out, so I asked him what happened, and they didn't know, but there was no sign of foul play. He had just been found, and he had passed away in his sleep, which was shocking. He was 42. And so I knew right away he had a heart attack because he had a bad heart valve, and he had troubles with it on and off through the years. And unfortunately, he smoked, and so I know that was part of it. But then in my other videos that I talked about, like him losing his wife and his kid because of JW policy years before, I think it all just took a physical toll on him. And so I hung up the phone from that, and then I realized, like, I have to tell my family. And no one is there to do that for me. So I remember the detective on the phone asked me, he said, "Do you have parents that we can go tell?" And I just was like, it was like reliving them both being gone again. And I just said, "No, they're dead." And I just kept saying to him, "They're dead. Everybody's dead." Because at that point, my mind, all I could think was like, all these people, my parents and my sister and my brother and my sister-in-law and my nephew. And I was just like, kind of inconsolable. So I hung up and I called my boyfriend, who kind of made a mad dash. And then I was like, what do I have to do to like get a hold of myself? And I thought, you know what? I need to get like pissed off. So I called my only other brother, who, as you know from the earlier videos, was also the person who had molested me growing up and was an elder in another state. Sorry, the dogs don't like this part of the story either. And so I called him. So that brother and I didn't really have a relationship, but we did talk once in a while when it came to things like this, like family matters. And so I called him, and I remember he was in like 5 o'clock traffic, and I told him, like, John had died and what happened. And I remember being like, in my mind, so that was the one thing that like kept me together, because I just kept thinking like, and this is probably a terrible thing to say, and I hope nobody judges me, but grief makes you think terrible things. And all I could think was like, it was the wrong brother. Like, why did it have to be that one? So I tasked him with calling 2 other of my sisters. And then I said, I have one full sister and one half sister that's in the area. I said, so I'm going to go to our other sister, who also was a witness, who lived in the area. I said, I'm going to go there and tell her in person, because she's the oldest of all of us, and I did not want her to be told over the phone. She had gone through so much. And so I drove down, and, my boyfriend was there by then, and he drove me down, and we told her in person, and that was awful. And then all my family came back, for the funeral. I kind of had talked about it before. When my mom had passed away, my family, my brother and I were disfellowshipped then, and my siblings were, very good about making sure that we could all be together. They did not do what a lot of the horror stories I hear from other ex-JWs, where they're completely pushed out of that. We actually did operate as a family unit during that time. And so when John died, we did as well again. So since he wasn't a witness and he didn't really have any desire to ever be a witness, we did a very simple like graveside service, which was the most beautiful. It was better than any other witness funeral that I've ever been to, because it was actually about John. So people, talked about him, and it was just a very emotional time. And then my brother, who was alive and gunning to be an elder, stood up and like read scripture and talked about like the paradise. And at the time I was so full of grief that I couldn't even like focus on what was happening. But then I remember just being extremely upset later, because John did not believe any of that. And I remember thinking how disrespectful that it was, but at the same time kind of validation that they did not really know him. I mean, they kind of soft shunned him too. Like, they would have contact with him on and off through the years, but of course they didn't have a sibling-like relationship. So they were holding on to this false hope that he still believed that it was the truth, when really, technically, John could have been considered an apostate because he spoke out about the witnesses to other people. Basically anyone that would listen that was his friend, or, me. But they didn't know that about him, and they didn't respect his wishes, that is not what he wanted. John just wanted to, When he died, he just wanted to be gone. So after all of that mess, like after the funeral and everyone was gone, I started to like really think about some of the things John and I had talked about religion. And I really started thinking about how he was treated in the organization, but also within the family. And that then his funeral, that his beliefs, what he actually did believe, was not respected by my other family. And at that point in my life, in my mind, I kind of knew, like, I'm not going back to this. Like, this is not okay. And at the same time, I'm trying to reconcile the fact that, like, my brother, who is still alive and trying to be an elder, is a child. You know, he molested me for years, and he is this holier-than-thou person that's looked up to by all these other people who even knew what he had done. And I just was like, how is any of this okay? Like, all my experiences, the way I'd been treated, how is any of it okay? How does it make an organization be, like, the one that God is using? Like, he's using those kind of people. So it was right on the cusp of, like, being mentally fully awake. And then little by little, things started popping up in the media. I remember seeing the movie Apostasy was coming out, and I thought, like, ooh, I kind of want to watch it, but I probably shouldn't. And then I watched it, and I remember just being, like, crying through it and thinking, like, this isn't apostasy. This is just telling exactly what happens when you're in this poor girl situation. Like, it's not lies. They're just saying what is the truth about the truth. And then I remember reading every morning or so, I would go onto the internet and I would read, I would check into peoplemagazine.com for my daily celeb gossip, but they also mix in other, like, news things there. And I remember there was this really long article, and it was about an ex-witness who was a missionary in China and her experience because her book was coming out. And I remember reading that article and just being like, what? And then I remember the day I, like, fired up the Google machine and I put in, like, Jehovah's Witnesses and all this stuff that came up. And I just was bombarded with story after story that I could relate to. So I knew this wasn't some apostate spreading lies. And I hate that the organization says that that's what apostates are. They're out spreading lies and trying to dismantle the organization for their benefit. Like, what am I benefiting from this? So I just was like, this is, like, I think I was in a cult. I think that John was right. And so then, of course, the big final, I think, aha moment is I had already been, like, binge watching everything about Scientology. There was a movie, I think it was called Going Clear. And then I watched Leah Remini's special on Scientology, and I was just like, these people are nuts. And then the next minute I'd be like, but that's exactly how I was raised. And I would see these poor people who were, you know, kicked out of Scientology and were being shunned, and they were so emotional and so upset. And I never once thought they were lying, because I was just like, this is like someone who's disfellowshipped. Like, this is like me talking. And I remember just sitting there and, like, sobbing with these people and thinking to myself, like, this isn't normal that an organization does this. And so then she had this special about the witnesses. And so my boyfriend and I watched it together, and I was just, like, crying through the whole thing. But then we had to keep, like, stopping, and I had to keep explaining things to him, because he was like, wait, witnesses do this and they believe that, and why can't men have beards? And on and on it went. And then he really, like, I really started opening up more, because up to then I would share with him little bits and pieces, but I never spoke negatively of the organization. And then once I did start, it was like just floodgates. Like, I just was pouring stuff out about, like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is what you had to do, this is what happened to me. And then right around that same time, it was actually just a little bit before that, I had been talking about, like, therapy and talking to somebody again, because I had after my brother's funeral, I had to deal with my other brother a little bit on and off for things, and I was just really not in a very good place. And my boyfriend could not figure out exactly what was going on. And so I just told him one day, I said, I told you that, like, for years I was molested growing up. And then I told him, but I never told him by who. And so then I told him. And the only reason I had hesitated up to then is because I was so afraid of, not rejection, of feeling like defeated and my pain minimized, because every important man in my life up to then, like my ex-husband and so forth, that I had shared that with, really minimized it and never fully 100% took my side. And this was the first time. So my boyfriend is very quiet, he's very reserved, and he, like, is fabulous and lets me do basically whatever I want. He's not like we need to do this or can you do that. He's literally the opposite of any of that, except for when I told him this story and I told him, like, who had been the person that had molested me. He just said, oh, well, that's it. Like, you don't need to deal with him anymore. He's like, you don't need to ever talk to him. You don't need to have him in your life. And he said, if he needs to be contacted for anything or dealt with or talked to, I will do it. He's like, that is not all right. And he's an older brother and he has 2 younger siblings. And so, like, to me, I thought, if he knows this and he knows that what an older brother should and shouldn't do with younger siblings, then that was just affirmation that, like, my brother did know better. And so he just kind of, like, gave me that power of saying, like, just say no. This guy doesn't need to be in your life. This is wrong that you're being made to feel this way, and this is not going to happen. And it was the first time anyone in my entire life had said that. My other siblings had told me, like, if you're not comfortable, like, we'll support you. But no one had just said, he's 100% wrong, you're 100% right, get him out of your life. Nobody had ever said that. And so it was a huge, like, life-changing, empowering, like, moment for me. And it was a huge part of me taking some power back and looking at the big picture and being like, what else have I done or am I doing that I have the power to say, no, I don't want this in my life, or yes, I want this in my life, and that's okay. And that started kind of this whole journey of discovery, and that is what helped me literally start Googling witnesses and start reading about other policies. And then after Leah Remini's special, I, like so many before us, found John Cedars at the time, which is now Lloyd Evans. And I remember watching his first couple of videos and feeling like, Adam, this is ridiculous. I own my own home and I live in it. Like, just the 2 of us live here. And I had the volume, like, all the way down. Like, I don't know what I thought was going to happen, but I remember, like, sneak listening to them in my own house. And then realizing, this guy is just telling, like, he's just telling the facts. And Lloyd and I are both in a similar age range, and we had the similar background, like baptized at the same time and very zealous. And so a lot of that experience part of it, I understood. And so then I just went deep into the internet and, like, XJW stuff, and then Crisis of Conscience was read, and there was no going back at that point. I was fully awake. And then right before COVID hit, I actually had started having XJW meetups, and I joined my first few online groups. But I had a couple meetups and really hearing other people. And then I have a friend who's a therapist, and she joined one of them. She's never been a witness, and she kind of mediated the first meetup so that we had some direction, and she could give some. She's very quiet most of the time, but then give some feedback. And I just remember all of us talking about how hard it was to be being shunned, and the pain and the confusion went with that. And she just very simply said to us, what I'm hearing is you are feeling pain over the fact that people are withholding from you something that you deserve, that should be given to you, and they're making that choice. And that was the first time anybody verbalized they're making the choice. Because when you're a witness and you're growing up, they tell you if you leave, that's your choice. It's like reverse psychology, that you are choosing to be shunned. And so that's so ingrained in you that to have somebody else outside listen and view and understand it and just plainly say they're making a choice to pick their religion over you was extremely validating and empowering. And I thought, it sounds silly, but to have something so simple be so life-changing, it really, really was. So it was just kind of this gradual combination of things until I was fully awake. And then I just said, this is it. I'm going to burn it to the ground. One brick at a time. That tower's coming down. And my only mission is not to spread any lies, but to give people validation. As I've done these videos, I'm not a mega YouTuber. I only have a few hundred subscribers. My videos have only been viewed, a few hundred times. But with that number, the percentage of people, especially women, who've reached out to me and said, your story mirrors my story. I was married to an abusive alcoholic. I grew up and being molested, and nobody did anything about my case. I mean, the volume of comments and emails that I'm getting like that just tells me that for all those years that I felt so alone in those situations and circumstances, I was not the only person feeling alone. But that organization wants you to, they say we're the happy people, and you have to fake who you are in the congregation, in your social circles. You cannot fully express yourself. You cannot let your guard down entirely and confide in just anybody. You're stuck in these fake personas, and because of that, it encourages rampant abuse. Because if you can't say anything because you don't want to smear Jehovah's name and you don't want to make his chosen people look bad, nobody's going to say anything. And so it just is like fuel on a fire to abusive situations. And I understood that a little bit, but having this channel, and it's funny because I've been awake for quite a while, but having this channel and seeing these comments coming in and the emails is really opening my eyes more and more every day. That like the volume of people that have experienced life-altering, damaging, long-term, serious abuses and issues is astonishing, and it is disgusting. And so I have never been, in my life before this, I was never a loud, aggressive, like bossy person. It's just not really who I am. So for me to even do this channel has been extremely challenging. It was extremely challenging, But the more it goes on, the more determined I am that I am going to try my best to stay as level-headed and not let my frustration show too much. But, I am here as a voice for so many of us who were silenced. So my wake up was a bizarre combination and concoction of trauma and loss and pain, but then also of just observing how other people are treated and the understanding that Jehovah's Witnesses view themselves as like the elite group in the world is anything but humble. And so all of that helped me to better understand that, doctrinally, that's a whole nother thing, right? Like the Bible and all that is a different thing. But my wake up process from that cult was a combination of things. And there's so many people still stuck in it, but I see more and more people are physically and mentally out. And my hope is that that trend just continues. And the next thing you know, it's physically out, mentally out, and that organization just is a thing of the past. That was a lot. I feel like I'm always like bombarding you guys with a lot of traumatic experiences, but such is the story of my life. And on top of it, there's been a lot of joy and affirmation. And like I say, I am very fortunate that I have, the other part of my wake up process, I think I've talked about a little bit, but being with my boyfriend and seeing like his family is very close, and they're truly are the definition of unconditional love and acceptance. And to see that firsthand has really been life-changing for me, completely and utterly, to see that in action. So I encourage anybody out there who is on the fence about Googling Jehovah's Witnesses to please do it. And please meet people who are not Jehovah's Witnesses and talk to them and find out they are real human beings who are good and decent people, because there's a lot of those out there who do not claim to be God's only chosen people. That's it for today. I'm going to leave it there, and we will talk more later. I have some fun things up my sleeve that now that I have the bulk of this at my life story out of the way, I will leave this here and plan for some fun, engaging things in the future. And again, feel free to follow me on Instagram, follow me on Twitter. You can email me if you need to, which is just aisforapostate@gmail.com. And I hope you all take care of each other and love each other in a true and genuine fashion. Accept people for who they are. And until next time, have a wonderful, fun, loving, happy, cult-free day.